Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at David and a matter of honor. 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel 25:1, then Samuel died, that wasn't good news, and all Israel gathered together and mourned for him and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. So David leaves the area. Wilderness of Paran is way down in the south, in the Sinai Peninsula, as he goes down to this area known as Paran. Verse 2. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, not the same Carmel as Mount Carmel. I think it's probably a little bit further south. And the man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And then we have a little bit of explanation, verse 3. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail, and the woman was intelligent. The Hebrew there is she was tov, she was good and beautiful. It can have the idea of intelligence. Beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. If you know anything about Caleb, Caleb is sort of an independent sort of fellow. That in itself isn't bad, but it's not good when it comes with foolishness. And indeed, the word Nabal, names have meaning. Remember, David's name means beloved. Nabal's name means fool. Well, verse 4, back to our story, that David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. And so now David sends some people. Here's David's message. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, have a long life, peace be to you, and peace be to your house." Very honorable ways to address somebody. "And peace be to all that you have." Verse 7, now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have they missed anything at all in all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find to your servants and to your son David. He's asking, yes, for, you could call it repayment, but he's not asking it as repayment. He's asking for a gift, but a gift recognizing that he's taken care of their people, even though he could have done very differently. He has not done that. Verse 9, when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name, and then they waited. Well, we don't have to wait. Verse 10, but Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? Are there many servants today who are each breaking away from his master? Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know? Who the heck are you? Notice he treats him in rather a standoffish, dishonorable way. Verse 12, so David's young men retraced their way and went back, and they came and told him according to all these words. Verse 13, David said to his men, each of you gird on his sword. So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and was about 400 men that went up behind David, while 200 stayed behind with the baggage. So his numbers are up to 600 now. He takes 400, and he's about to do Nabal wrong. Verse 14, now we have one of the young men who came and told Abigail, Nabal's wife, and said, behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us. And she gets the rest of the story. And we were not insulted, nor did we miss anything, as long as we were about with them, while we were with them in the fields. Notice that word fields. We could say in the wild. It's not like cultivated fields. Verse 16 goes on to explain, they were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the time we were with them tending the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master. That's not necessarily moral evil, although that might be the case too, but calamity is plotted against our master and against all his household. And he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. We wanted to tell him, but we can't have this conversation with him. So we need to have it with somebody of intelligence, and that's you. Well, verse 18, then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread. He hears they're coming with a bunch of people. 200 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 measures of roasted grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and loaded them on donkeys. This was no small undertaking. Verse 19, she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I'm coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So she's doing this on her own. Well, notice she's got the authority to do that on her own. Well, verse 20, it came about as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the hidden part of the mountain that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her. So she met them. It sort of reminds us a little bit of how David had been earlier on one side of the mountain, Saul had been on the other, and, you know, like, what's going to happen? Well, here's the situation repeated, and I think we are supposed to get that repetition. We'll see this later on, where she comes around one side and he comes around the other, and so they meet. Verse 21, now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and now he's returned me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of any who belong to him. David has vengeance in his heart, and notice he couches this language in the language of an oath. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. This is the most respectful of all greetings. She is coming as a supplicant before him. Verse 24, here we see Abigail speaking. She fell at his face and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the blame. Do you see what she's doing? She's coming and she's saying, blame me instead. Let me take the place of Nabal. Let me be the substitute. And please, she goes on to say, please let your maidservant speak to you and listen to the words of your maidservant. She's coming as the substitute, as the representative, as the atoner of her husband. Verse 25, she goes on to say, please do not let my Lord pay attention to this worthless man, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. You sort of get the point. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young man of my Lord whom you sent. In other words, I didn't know about this. I wouldn't have acted in such a way. Verse 26, now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, since the Lord has restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. Let your enemies be foolish before the Lord. Verse 27, now let this gift which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, be given to the young men who accompany my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. Remember that when you see the Lord in all capital letters, it's Yahweh. He's fighting the battles of Yahweh, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Verse 29, should anyone rise up to pursue you and seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will sling out from the hollow of a sling. He sort of, notice the language reminds me a little bit of David and Goliath, and the language is supposed to remind us of certain things. Even the way she has come, remember how she sent the gifts on ahead? Does that remind you of something? It reminds you a little bit of Jacob coming to Esau to make peace. Here she is being the Israel who's coming to David to make peace. Verse 30, and when the Lord does for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause, and by my Lord having avenged himself. When the Lord deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. She's asking for grace from David. Verse 32, then David responds now. David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord God of Israel who sent you this day to meet me, and blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. David recognizes that was not the right thing to do. Verse 34, nevertheless, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had come quickly to meet me, surely there would have not been left to Nabal until the morning light as much as one male. David had calamity in his heart. He had evil in his heart against Nabal. And now that has been turned away. Verse 35, so David received from her hand what she had brought him and said to her, go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and granted your request. Verse 36, then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house. He's clueless, like the feast of a king. He's acting the part of a king. He's not a king, but he thinks he is. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk, so she did not tell him anything. Doesn't really pay to talk to a drunk. She did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. She figures she's going to wait till he sobers up. Verse 37, but in the morning when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, so that he became as a stone. And then it's almost anticlimactic. Verse 38, about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. You know, his end is going to come very quickly, but it will be at the Lord's hands, not at David's hands. Now, as we look at this passage, notice you started off chapter 25, verse 1, with the death of Samuel. You had David's request for some goods from Nabal. You had Nabal's dishonorable response, and then David's anger, David was ready to take him out. Then Abigail's honorable intercession as she intercedes on her husband's behalf. You have David's response, and now you come full circle, not for the death of Samuel, but now the death of Nabal. So you have the death of the prophet, but the death of this foolish man. Verse 39, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be the Lord who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from evil. The Lord has also returned the evil doing of Nabal on his own head. And then David sent a proposal to Abigail to take her as his wife. And so we have an explanation. Verse 40, then the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, and they spoke to her, saying, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. And verse 41, she arose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, behold, your maidservant is a maid to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. Again, this role of humility that she takes. Verse 42, then Abigail quickly arose and rode on a donkey with her 5 maidens who attended her, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife, and everything sort of happily ever after. Verses 43 and 44, just almost by way of a footnote, David had also taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both became his wives, so he's not just got one wife. And you say, wait a second, was he married to Michal? Well, we have the explanation in verse 44. Now Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who is from Galim, just so you can keep all these wives straight. Now, to close, notice we have 3 characters. We have Nabal, he's the fool. Abigail, she's both beautiful and wise. You have David, who's angered at the dishonor against him. In Nabal's case, he speaks to dishonor David. In Abigail's case, she's the peacemaker. She speaks to bring peace. And David, initially he's angry, but he listens and he is guided by her words. In Nabal's case, he dies. And in Abigail and David's case, they marry, and that's the end of this narrative. But the question is, where's God in the story? Where is God in the story? The answer was back in verse 39. Remember what David, when he heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be the Lord who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from evil. He recognizes that God was in the voice of Abigail, the one who came and interceded, who said, take me instead. And God is still in the voice of the one who came and said, take me instead. The voice of Jesus, who said that on our behalf.